My name is Phil Stasek, and I'd like to welcome you to another First Thursday event from the Space Coast Progressive Alliance. Our program tonight is going to be called Vote Smart 2024 Florida Ballot Measures Explained. We are very lucky tonight to have two real experts in the field to talk about the upcoming ballot measures that will be on our ballot in November during the election. Now, many people don't know that there are these extra things that we'll be all voting on, and hopefully people will be learning more as the election nears. But we thought it was important for us to take some time to make sure that people are educated, make sure that you know what's on the ballot, why it's on the ballot, background about it, and the best we could do is to actually get a member of the Florida State Legislature, Anna Eskamani, a great friend of the Space Coast Progressive Alliance and many of us here on the Space Coast, and somebody who is a shining star in the world of politics in the state of Florida, Dr. Aubrey Jewett. Dr. Jewett will be starting off tonight with our panel, and Anna Eskamani will be joining us, and we'll be having hopefully a very informative and educational opportunity to learn about these six potential amendments to our Florida state ballot. You'll have the opportunity to ask questions after they make their presentations. This is the kind of conversation that we really like to have, where the panelists can talk to each other. They can inform all of us. They can give us some action items. Something that we always ask our panelists to do is to give us action items for our guests, for our members, so that we all can do something to change the world, make it a better place. What I'd like to do first is to hand over to our SCPA president, Karen Houston. Karen, you have the floor.
Thank you, Phil, and thank you, Dr. Aubrey, and our speakers for tonight. But first of all, I want to give a little thanks to our Action Projects Committee Chair, Janice Moran, and the entire Action Project Committee, because they're the ones that put these events on monthly. So they deserve a big pat on the shoulder for all the work that they put in for that. So I thank you all for working very much on it. Our next event will be a hybrid. So you'll be able to, if you're not able to come, you'll be able to also check it out on Zoom. And it's going to be at the UU Church, I guess the Pioneer UU Church. I don't know the exact address. And it's a hobnob. So we're hoping we can get you all out to this hobnob in cooperation with the League of Women Voters and the Central Brevard NAACP. So that'll be August 1st, a hobnob with the candidates. We got a big slate coming, so we hope we can get you all out to ask questions and see what's going on with these see them up close and personal. And as always, if you're interested in the SCPA, Space Coast Progressive Alliance, you can go online at scpaflorida.com. That's Florida spelled out, SCPAFLORIDA Florida.com. I'm going to turn it over briefly to our treasurer, Carol Becca, and she can tell you a little more about how you can become a member and contribute to the Space Coast Progressive Alliance. I know I saw her, I think.
I got to unmute myself, sorry. Hi, certainly we welcome everybody to join our group, become a member. We ask that you give $25 for an individual membership and $35 for a family and $10 for a student. You can go onto that website that Karen was just talking about, scpaflorida.com, and it tells you how to use a credit card to pay. You can also mail a check, and it tells you there where to mail it. It's P.O. Box 412, Melbourne, Florida 32902. And we'd certainly welcome you. We're a very fun group. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. And we don't want to forget our action items. Each panelist that comes into our events, or are asked to give us action items. It'd be a waste of time if they give us these action items and we don't do anything with them. So I'm asking you all, please pay heed to the action items that our panelists give you tonight. And most of all, get out to vote, get your people out to vote, and listen intently on what they have to say tonight. And I think the community announcements are coming up next. Phil, you want to get that started? Thank you all for being here, and we hope that we have a full slate of people tonight. So let's get moving on.
Thank you very much, Karen. We really appreciate that. And I'll tell you what, since I happen to have the information in front of me, I can remind everybody that our Hobnob with the Candidates next month, August 1st, at 6:30 p.m. will be live at the Unitarian Universalist Friendship Fellowship Center. That's 3115 Friendship Place, Rockledge, Florida. And of course, as Karen said, you can join us on Zoom if you can't make it live to the event or you don't want to be at an event live right now. Again, that is 3115 Friendship Place, Rockledge, Florida, just north of the Pineda Causeway. So we'll look forward to seeing you next month, August 1st, for our first Thursday, which really is on the first Thursday. This month's first Thursday, as you could tell, is not on first Thursday because of the 4th of July holiday. Thank you again, Karen. I appreciate it. Let's see. I'm curious if there's anybody that has a community announcement. If you do, I'm going to ask you to please look on your Zoom profile. Look for the little reactions button. If you click that, there's a thing that says raise hand. If you click on that and click raise hand, then we'll be able to see you. We'll get you, give you a minute to make a presentation about whatever community announcement you have. If we have any candidates that are running for office and you'd like to have a quick minute to deliver a quick elevator speech or your stump speech, we'll happily call on you. If it doesn't matter what party, what group, whoever you're with, if you're running for office, we're always happy to recognize our friends who are running for office. Let's see. Joanne Terry has her hand up. Joanne, you have the floor.
Oh, thank you, Phil. Good evening. My name is Joanne Terry, and I am running for Florida State Representative for District 31 against GOP incumbent Tyler Soroy. My website is joanneterry.com, and on my website, I have a listing of several of my positions compared with how the incumbent has been voting the last few years. But the one that I want to highlight tonight is these very important ballot measures that we're going to be voting on in November. You know, our GOP-led legislature has a history of finding ways to not implement the will of the people if they don't like the way the vote turns out. And one of the reasons that I'm running this year is to make sure that the will of the people gets implemented, or do my best to work towards that, and to make sure that the people of District 31 have a voice in Tallahassee. So again, I'm Joanne Terry, and my website is joanneterry.com. And thank you very much, Phil and Karen, for having this little forum tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. We're really glad to have you here, and we thank you for running for office. Running for office is not easy. The SCPA has a policy of being nonpartisan. We don't endorse candidates. But you know what? We really do appreciate folks that are willing to step up and serve the public. The idea of citizen democracy is something I think we all really appreciate, and we really want to keep that around. Hopefully, we'll be able to have that pleasure, that privilege next year. I'm looking for anybody else that has their hand raised. Again, if you are interested in having a community announcement or you're a candidate running for office, please do go to the little reactions button on whatever kind of machine you've got, whether it's a laptop, your cell phone, your pad. Click the raise hand, and that way we'll be able to recognize you. We'll be using that functionality later in our program for you to ask questions of our panel. So probably a good chance for you to take a look and make sure that you know how that works. And I do not see anybody else with a hand raised, so I think we're going to move right along. If you have just joined us, I'm Phil Stasek, past president of the Space Coast Progressive Alliance, and you are on the Space Coast Progressive Alliance First Thursday event for the month of July, and it's called Vote Smart 2024, Florida Ballot Measures Explained.
I did see a hand up.
You did.
Vance Aarons.
You know, Vance, I did not see your hand, but...
It didn't stay up, but it was up for a second.
Well, you know what, Vance, I did not see your hand come up, but I'll tell you what, I'm sorry that I missed you. Please forgive me, and you have the floor.
No problem. Thank you. I probably hit it to put it back down. I'm out actually multitasking, both taking part in this and out doing lit drops and talking to people in between. So I'll be off and on, but I still wanted to hear. I am running for state senate for District 19, which covers most of the Space Coast, pretty much all of Brevard County, except for northern Titusville. All the launch pads are in my district. I'm running because, yeah, my competitor, my biggest competitor is Randy Fine. It is an open seat, and he's trying to move up to state senate. But their past history has not been in line with the will of the people, especially when it comes to ballot initiatives, things like restoring voters' rights and medical marijuana. Now we have Amendment 4 on the ballot, which is deeply important to me. I was the same age when Roe passed that my granddaughter was when it was overturned, and I can't see her growing up in a world where she doesn't have a right to her own health care. So if you all want to follow along, my website, which will be up online by the end of the week, is advance4fl.com, or you can also find me on Linktree, Advance for Florida. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vance. I'll tell you what, talk about multitasking, out canvassing and monitoring the SCPA at the same time. I'll tell you what, that's quite impressive, I must say. Again, I'm just going to ask one more time, because we're posting these websites in the chat here on our Zoom, and that is www.add, and I'm not sure what the rest is. Could you say it again, please?
Oh, no problem. Yes, it's ADD, Vance, VANCE, the number 4, FL.com. So Advance for Florida.
Good. We'll hopefully get that posted in our chat so that anybody that wants to look at that. We have a couple things already loaded into the chat for those that are on Zoom. Again, thank you very much. And I don't think I've missed anybody else. Is there anybody else with their hand up? I have not seen that. So I think we will proceed. Again, hey, for those of you that have just joined us, this is it's the Space Coast Progressive Alliance first Thursday event for July. And it's Vote Smart 2024 Florida Ballot Measures Explained. We have two fantastic panelists tonight, two experts in the field. The first ordinarily, I don't go through long bios because we like to save time, but I think, frankly, our panelists tonight deserve to have a little more credit for their experience and their accolades. Our first panelist this evening is Dr. Aubrey Jewett. He's a professor of political science at the University of Central Florida. Dr. Jewett received his PhD in political science from Florida State University and a BA in social science education from the University of North Florida. He's currently an associate professor of political science at the University of Central Florida, where he specializes in American, national, state, local, and Florida politics. Dr. Jewett is a former president and current treasurer of the Florida Political Science Association and is the co-founder of the Lou Frey Institute of Politics and Government at UCF, whose primary mission is civic education. Dr. Jewett has published numerous journal articles, book chapters, and scholarly books, a co-author of Politics in Florida, 4th edition, from the Florida Institute of Government and Pepper Tree Press. Actually, I just saw that he was quoted today in Florida Today. And so, he is a recognized expert in Florida politics. So we're very, very fortunate to have Dr. Jewett with us today. Also on our board, who will be joining us a little bit later, Dr. Anna Eskamani. She's a member of the Florida House of Representatives, House District 42. Anna is an old friend of the Space Coast Progressive Alliance, and frankly, a personal friend of many of our members. We've worked with her on different things as she has been working her way up to the position she now holds. She earned her PhD in public administration. She ran for office for the first time back in 2018, flipped her legislative seat, and has been reelected both in 2020 and 2022 in the landslide elections. She's running again this November. She made history as the first Iranian American elected to any public office in Florida and has championed Critical issues like economic justice, environmental protection, equality for all, funding for public schools, human trafficking, sexual assault prevention, and support of the arts and culture funding. Anna has been with us on a number of different panels over the years here at the SCPA, and we were very welcome. We're very, very happy to welcome her back. So tonight we're talking about democracy, democracy in its purest form. And in fact, some 6 proposed changes to the Florida state constitution. Rather than my blathering on about it, I'm going to hand the floor right over to Dr. Jewett, who will explain these, how we got to where we are right now, what's going to be on the ballot, why it's on the ballot. And again, remember, all of you will have a chance to ask questions of Dr. Jewett, hopefully Anna Eskamani as well when she gets here. And I got to remember, Dr. Eskamani. Congratulations to her if she's in cyberspace listening to us. Dr. Jewett, let me hand the floor over to you. You have the floor.
All right. Well, thank you, Phil. Appreciate that. It's great to be here, and appreciate you all inviting me and giving me an opportunity to cover some of this information. And I might also just give a plug for Anna. She is just terrific. She was one of my undergraduate students. I'm getting old now, so it had to be more than a decade ago. She and her twin sister, and I've been the faculty advisor for the Political Science Honor Society, and you wouldn't be surprised to know that Anna and her sister were president and vice president for a couple of years, and it was the most active the chapter's ever been before or since. They were just, doing so much. And then Anna just recently, just this past month, I've been on her PhD dissertation committee for about a year now, and so she just did successfully defend, so that's pretty exciting. All right, well, turning to our topic of the evening, what I wanted to do was briefly talk about how we can change the Florida Constitution, and then spend the bulk of the time actually going over these 6 specific things that will be on the ballot, okay? So here's the thing. In Florida, there are actually 5 ways to propose an amendment to the Florida Constitution. And there's just one way, though, to ratify it, right? So, but there's 5 ways to propose an amendment. 2 of them are commissions. We have the Constitutional Revision Commission, which meets every 20 years. And that's a group of people that come together and they usually hold hearings, go around the state, and then they propose things that are actually put on the ballot. And then we also have another commission, the Taxation and Budget Reform Commission, which also meets every 20 years, although they meet on alternate decades. So they're sort of a decade apart. They also are made up of a group of people, but as the name suggests, they can come up with items that are specifically about taxing and budgeting and put those on the ballot in front of the people. Neither of those is at play in this election, but they are too. And I might add the other one that's not at play in this election, and in fact, it's never been used in Florida, is we do have a procedure where we could call a constitutional convention. And you have to gather signatures and have a petition, and then you vote whether or not to call the petition. And then if that vote is passes, from the public, then we'd actually have a constitutional convention where you could propose amendments that would go before the public. Again, that one's never been used. All of this is with our in our 1968 Constitution, which is the one that we're currently on. And then finally, we have 2 other methods that are being used this election. And that is legislative proposal and the initiative petition. And so with legislative proposal, you have to have, if I remember right, 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate have to vote to propose the amendment. So it takes more than a simple majority. But if the House and the Senate by 2/3 or more propose an amendment and use the exact same language, then that would go on the ballot. And then the final way, which we see a couple on this year's ballot, is through the initiative petition. And so with the initiative petition, you have to have a group that wants to change the Constitution. And so they draw up a petition, and then they have to go gather signatures. And in round numbers, they have to get close to 1 million signatures today. Officially, what they have to do is they have to get at least 8% of the total number of voters who turned out in the last presidential election. So in Florida right now, it comes to a little bit less than 1 million signatures that you have to go out and gather. And you also have to get them from a variety of the congressional districts. You can't just get them all from like one little area of the state. You have to get them from a bunch of the congressional districts all around the state. And then if you get enough signatures, it will trigger a ballot review by the Florida Supreme Court, who is supposed to review them to make sure that the ballot summary is clear and concise and not deceptive, and that the average person could understand it, and that the proposal is only covering one subject. So if the Florida Supreme Court decides that you are trying to cover more than one subject, they can stop you from putting your amendment on the ballot. Or if they think that your ballot summary is deceptive, they can stop you from putting it on the ballot. But assuming you get over that hurdle and the Florida Supreme Court says, you can get it on the ballot, then you continue to gather signatures. And then if you get the requisite number of signatures, you actually get your proposal on the ballot. So finally, then, if that's the 5 ways we can propose, how do we ratify? Well, we ratify by a vote of the public. And for much of Florida's history, like most states, you just needed a 50% plus 1 vote to approve a constitutional amendment. But about a decade or so ago, maybe a little more now, I'm getting old, so the time is flying, but yeah, more than a decade ago now, I think, we actually had a constitutional amendment that said, do we want to require 60% to approve future constitutional amendments? And that did pass, but rather ironically, it only passed with 58% of the vote. So it didn't get 60% of the vote, but at the time you only needed 50, so it passed. But what that means today, to bring it all together, is that we have 6 proposed amendments on this year's ballot. And in order to pass, they will have to get 60% of the vote, not just 50. And this is called direct democracy. Most of what we do in American politics and Florida politics is representative democracy. We elect decision makers, governors, state legislators, city council people, mayor, and they make the decisions for us. They make the policies, they pass the laws, they pass the local ordinances, etc. But in direct democracy, it's actually where the public, the people, get to decide policy directly. And so what we're doing with these 6 amendments is basically it's a statewide referendum on whether or not we want to put these things into the Constitution. All right, so I'm going to attempt to share a screen. I do have a PowerPoint just with these 6. Let's see here, share. So then let's see if I do this right. Let me make that a little bigger. Okay, and so if I did that right, you can now see my screen. And so we have 6 constitutional amendments, 60% to pass. Okay, the first one, partisan election of members of district school boards. The sponsor of this one was the Florida legislature itself. Here's the ballot summary. Proposing amendments to the state constitution to require members of a district school board to be elected in a partisan election rather than a nonpartisan election, and to specify that the amendment only applies to elections held on or after November 2026 general election. However, partisan primary elections may occur before the 2026 general election for purposes of nominating political party candidates to that office for placement on the 2026 general election ballot. Okay, in plain language, this is kind of like deja vu, because back in 1998, the Constitutional Revision Commission, which I mentioned a minute ago is one of the ways you can propose, they actually put on the ballot to say, let's make school board elections nonpartisan. And they put this before the voters, and the voters said, yes, we like that idea. Let's make Florida's school board elections nonpartisan, because they used to be partisan. But now we see the legislature moving to make them partisan again. A couple things here that I looked up. One, how many other, not that just because every other state does it, we should do it or vice versa, but I did look it up. And the vast majority of states, like 40 states, 41 states, don't use party labels when they elect school board members. Only a handful, just like 4, require the use of party labels. And you can see that's like Louisiana, Alabama, Pennsylvania, and Connecticut. And then there's 5 others that leave it as a local option. They leave it up to the local school districts to decide whether they're going to have partisan school board elections or not. But bottom line is most of the United States has decided that they don't want the partisanship that we see at the national level and at the state level in elections for school board. Now, I might add, that doesn't mean that partisanship doesn't play a role in school board elections, right? Because a lot of different school board members do identify with a party. It's just under the current rules, they mostly don't advertise that very much. And most specifically, when we say we have a nonpartisan election, it means that on the ballot itself, it does not have an R for Republican or a D for Democrat next to the name of the candidate. And so without that voting queue, a lot, your average voter might not know whether somebody is Republican or Democrat, even if they are registered. And so this other map I just pulled up, someone went to the trouble a year or 2 ago of looking up the partisan affiliation of every school board member in the state. And then they could tell you, like, if it's a 5-person school board, then if it's 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats, then it's a Republican dominated school board, et cetera. So that's what they did. And this shows you that, as you might expect, in Florida politics, most of the counties have a Republican dominated school board. That's in red. The blue are ones that have Democratic dominated school boards, and they tend to be the large urban counties. And then in yellow, let's see, those were the ones, what did they put here? For in which yellow, could flip red this fall. So this was just done last year. So, sort of to wind this one up, I think that, in my view, the progressive position is the one that voters decided back in 1998, which is we'd prefer not to have overt partisanship and national party issues and even state party issues injected into the school board races. Instead, what the argument that carried the day back in 1998, why we switched from partisan ones, was that we would rather people try to work more collegially and think about what's good for the students, what's good for the teachers, what's good for learning outcomes, and work collegially instead of really highlighting the partisanship aspect. And that's particularly true in the last election cycle, when Governor DeSantis took the very unusual step of spending a lot of money and making a lot of endorsements and recommendations for Republican school board, conservative Republican school board members who are part of the Moms for Liberty movement, among other things. So in my way of thinking, the progressive position on this would be to vote no and to leave things as they are. The right to hunt and fish, also sponsored by the Florida legislature, the official ballot summary proposing an amendment to the state constitution to preserve forever fishing and hunting, including by the use of traditional methods, as a public right and preferred means of responsibly managing and controlling fish and wildlife, specifies that the amendment does not limit the authority granted to the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission under the Florida Constitution. Basically, the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission is in the Florida Constitution and does have certain responsibilities. Why is this one on the ballot? Well, again, basically all 4 of the ones that are put on by the Florida legislature were fairly partisan, meaning that Republicans have a supermajority in both the House and Senate, and they Republicans pushed this through. This is actually an amendment. About half the states a little less than half, but about half, have some similar amendment, most of which have been passed in the last 20 years. The National Rifle Association has been pushing this in a number of states, and including they had model language that the Florida drafters used. They didn't use the exact language, but they used quite a bit of the language that the National Rifle Association uses. We were talking a little bit right before the meeting started, some of the board members and I, and one of the things that came up, and I think it may be true, is there was some thought that this may also be a way to try to encourage some more Republican conservative hunters and fishers. Not that some Democrats and progressive don't like fishing and hunting as well, but there is some thought that maybe there was some partisanship there. As I have read about this online and read some, positions and some opinions about this, I would say that the progressive position on this would be to vote no. There is no problem in Florida right now with the right to fish and hunt. People have a right to fish and hunt. About 10% of the public of adults have a fishing license in Florida, and only about 1% have a hunting license, but they have a lot of opportunities. Some of the arguments that I read against this were, for instance, includes the use of traditional methods as a public right and preferred means to responsibly manage and control fish and wildlife. They pointed out that some of the traditional methods might be inhumane steel traps for hunting, or using wide drift nets for fishing, and that really managing and controlling wildlife and fish in Florida has not been about trying to go and get more of them out. It's actually been the other way around. If we're trying to conserve it, we want to maybe put some species off limits. Also, I read some private property advocates are a little concerned as well, because the model language from the NRA actually had a clause in there that specifically says, this doesn't apply, to people's private property. You just can't go and hunt just because you want to, or fish if it's somebody's private property. But for whatever reason, the sponsors, the individual legislative sponsors of this, did not include that. So there's some concerns that it might also override some property rights. So my take, again, based on what I've read, some of the pros and con arguments and this sort of thing, is this is trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist in Florida. There's no danger to people's right to hunt and fish. Lots of people go hunt and fish. We do have reasonable regulations like hunting seasons and fishing season and catch limits and these kinds of things. And there's no reason to mess with that. And in fact, actually, one of the most convincing articles I read was actually by a conservationist who was responsible for writing up the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission amendment that was put in the Constitution like 25 years ago. And he's come out strongly against this. And he says, I like to hunt and I like to fish. And I think, the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission does a good job. But I think that this amendment opens up all kinds of potential problems for protecting the environment and protecting fish and wildlife. So that was his view. All right. 3, adult personal use of marijuana. This was done by the initiative petition. Smart and Safe Florida was the group's name. It would allow adults 21 years and older to possess, purchase, or use marijuana products and marijuana accessories for non-medical personal consumption by smoking, ingestion, or otherwise. Allows medical marijuana treatment centers and other state licensed entities to acquire, cultivate, process, manufacture, sell, and distribute such products and accessories. Applies to Florida law, does not change or immunize violations of federal law, establishes possession limits for personal use, allows consistent legislation, defines terms, provides effective date. So in brief, this would allow the recreational use of marijuana in Florida for people who are 21 years or older, but also would allow the legislature to have some regulation consistent with the overall purpose of the amendments. To me, the progressive position on this would be to vote yes. That's sort of the libertarian position, I think, as well. which is the thought that, you know, adults, particularly with marijuana these days and the experience that this country's had with marijuana over the last 50 years, that a lot of people think that the biggest problem with marijuana in terms of criminal justice is that we arrest a lot of people for small amounts of marijuana, and then they get criminal records. And in some cases, if they're poor, they have fines they can't pay. And then that's a record that sort of drags around with them and then takes away the right to vote if it's a felony and not a misdemeanor. And so, you know, Florida did approve medical marijuana just a few years to go. This would be the next step. I forgot to pull up a screen, but in my memory tells me about half the states have approved marijuana use, and many of those have been recreational, not just medical. So it does seem to be a trend that more states are saying, look, this is probably no more or less dangerous than alcohol. Lots of people seem to want to use it. Why don't we allow it legally? We can regulate it, we can tax it. It will provide a lot of tax money instead of providing a lot of underground economy kinds of things, right? And then you could use this tax money for good purposes like education or healthcare or drug treatment facilities, for instance, if you wanted to have something that was directly, you know, related. The governor, again, if is this progress, you know, would it be progressive to support it? Once again, I would point out that the governor is strongly against this, and considering he's a very conservative Republican, that probably suggests that the progressive position would be to vote yes. He's created a PAC to spend a lot of money if they can raise it to try to fight this one and to try to fight the abortion rights amendment, which we'll talk about in a second. I will say so far they haven't raised much money in this new PAC, very little so far, in fact. But he is using the bully pulpit of the governor to go around the state saying things like this won't allow any regulation and we'll have marijuana in the schools and the state will smell like pot everywhere and this sort of thing. Sort of really going over the top. Reminds me of, you know, like when I was a kid in the 70s when the adults would say all these crazy things about marijuana and you would just sort of snicker and laugh, right? So I don't know that he has a lot of influence, I will say, right? He seems to be very popular with the conservative Republican crowd. And so even if he doesn't have a lot of money, him speaking against it, you know, maybe enough to stop it from getting to 60%. But the public opinion polls currently show, at least a couple of them have shown that this is above 60% currently. So we'll have to see what happens. And then the other one that was put on by initiative petition is the Amendment 4, the Abortion Rights Amendment, specifically called Amendment to Limit Government Interference with Abortion. Floridians Protecting Freedom was the sponsor. So the ballot summary is this: no law shall prohibit, penalize, delay, or restrict abortion before viability or when necessary to protect the patient's health, as determined by the patient's healthcare provider. This amendment does not change the legislature's constitutional authority to require notification to a parent or guardian before a minor has an abortion. That last line is because that is also in the Florida Constitution. Maybe 20 years ago, Floridians voted to say that parental notification would be required whenever a minor seeks an abortion. We've also passed a law, I might add, that now requires parental consent as well. But this ballot amendment would actually override that parental consent law, because that parental consent law is not in the Constitution, whereas the notification part is in the Constitution. And this amendment says this won't affect that. So if you're a minor seeking an abortion, parent or guardian would still have to be notified. Most of you are probably aware of what's happened with abortion rights in the United States and in Florida, but I will still, as a political science professor, dutifully give you the 1-minute summary in the last few years. For about 50 years, we had the US Supreme Court ruling in Roe v. Wade, which allowed women the right to have an abortion up till the point of viability, with some state regulation allowed in the second trimester, and with a lot of state regulation allowed in the third trimester. And in fact, you could even forbid abortion from in the third trimester as long as there was a clause that allowed if a woman's life or health was in danger, or at least her life. The health part was where it always got a little hazy in court battle. Anyways, Roe v. Wade was the law of the land for about 50 years, but just a few years ago, with a new U.S. Supreme Court conservative majority, they overturned that 6-3, and thus they said it's up to the states to decide. It's no longer a constitutional right, a constitutional amendment under the U.S. Constitution. And so each state then had to decide what to do. Florida initially passed a 15-week abortion ban. The legislature passed it, the governor signed it. And then, of course, there was a lawsuit because under Florida law, we also have in the Florida Constitution a right to privacy. And previous Florida Supreme Courts has said the right to privacy specifically covered a woman's right to have an abortion. Now, it didn't seem to be too huge of a deal because you had the Roe v. Wade decision covering everybody anyway. But that Florida decision did allow, for instance, when they passed a law requiring parental notification like 25 years ago, the Florida Supreme Court at that time declared that unconstitutional because they said people have a right to privacy, and so you can't do that. And so that's why they went the constitutional amendment route, and they got it put in as a constitutional amendment. And when the public approved it, the parental notification, then that became law of the land. Well, anyway, so before the 15-week ban could even be decided by the courts, the Florida legislature decided to pass a 6-week ban. And the 15-week ban, quite frankly, as a matter of policy, it was more restrictive than what we had under Roe v. Wade and viability, which is usually around 24 weeks or so. But I read a statistic, like 95% of abortions happen before the 15th week. And so in terms of actual policy affecting women, it wasn't going to have a huge impact. Still was a court battle and there was a fight about it. But the 6-week ban, that's a big impact because many women do not know. My wife and I have 5 kids, so I won't claim to be an expert on everything, but I do know a little bit about if women know when they're pregnant. And a lot of times you don't know at 6 weeks. And so a 6-week ban in effect for many women is a complete ban because they don't know they're pregnant. All right, so since I see that I've only got 3 minutes to cover 2 more amendments, I shall move along. But the progressive position on this one would be to vote yes. I think.
Dr. Jewett, this is Phil, and you can take your time. We haven't seen Anna come up yet.
Oh, okay. Well, then I shall just
please do.
I shall give 3 or 4 minutes to each of the last 2. Then I won't speed through both of them in 3 minutes. So
take your time.
Okay. So anyway, so then this is the abortion rights amendment. I will say then, if I have a little more time, I'll say the politics around this one is that the Democrat Party is hoping that this inspires higher Democratic turnout. Now, they do also realize that in order to get to 60%, they need to get a lot of NPA voters, swing voters, no party affiliate. I've always been registered NPA. So they need to get more NPA and swing voters to vote for this. And they're going to need some Republican support as well. I might add also that the Floridians Protecting Freedom, when they were gathering those signatures, when they got up to about 1 million, they also pointed out that about 15%, so that was like 150,000 signatures, were from registered Republicans. So there was, and still is, some Republicans in the state who believe in a woman's right to choose. So I thought that was interesting. Whether it will get to 60%, I don't know. I'm confident we'll hit 50. Will it hit 60? Maybe. Again, I've seen some polls suggest that it will. It's right there, or maybe even a little above. As with the recreational marijuana amendment, the governor and a lot of conservative Republicans and pro-life groups are going to be running a sort of a full court press against this. To use a basketball analogy, they're basically going to be running ads and talking about this. And basically their take seems to be that this is an extreme amendment, that it will allow abortion up to the point of birth, or Donald Trump was even quoted as saying like a post-birth abortion at one point, something coming out of his mouth. Anyway, so I think that seems to be what they're going to try to say, is try to convince voters that this somehow is extreme. In my view, this, for the most part, just puts us back to where we were with Roe v. Wade, because under Roe v. Wade, a woman had a right to choose an abortion up to the point of viability, for the most part. And that's basically what we'll go back to here. I will say that, again, that what they're going to say, and because I've already heard them say it, like the governor and some of the others, they'll say, oh, well, if it's just necessary to protect a patient's health is determined by the patient's healthcare provider, then they'll say, oh, well, that doesn't even have to be a doctor. It could just be a nurse. It could just be a physician assistant. And it could be for any reason, right? So you could have a perfectly healthy 9-month-old baby, and the day before it was going to be born, they could abort it just because for fun, or something like that. Coming up with sort of these wild examples that in real life just don't, we haven't seen that, right? It's like we know from statistics that if women have a very late term abortion, almost always it's because of some super tragic circumstance of something that's happened to the fetus, or something that might happen to the mother. So, all right, so I will move on though. The last two are also sponsored by the Florida legislature. I always say it wouldn't be a Florida election if we didn't have some constitutional amendment put on the ballot by the legislature that would seek to cut taxes or reduce taxes, because they do that a lot over the last 20 years. And that's what this one would do. Number 5, annual adjustments to the value of certain homestead exemptions. Propose an amendment to the state constitution to require annual adjustment for inflation to the value of the current or future homestead exemptions that apply solely to levies other than school district levies, and for which every person who has a legal or equitable title to real estate and maintains thereon the permanent residence of the owner or another person legally or naturally dependent upon the owner is eligible. Woo! Now, if that wasn't written by a lawyer, I don't know what was, right? I mean, that's like a mouthful. In sort of more plain language, this is going to provide, if it passes, a tax break to homeowners. If you're a homeowner and you have the homestead exemption, this over time is going to give you a little bit more of a tax break. Florida traditionally had a $25,000 homestead exemption, and we still have that. So what that means is, let us say that your home was valued at, this is far-fetched these days because the prices have gone up so much, but we'll say your home was valued by the property appraiser at $100,000. Because of the $25,000 homestead exemption, you would only pay taxes on $75,000, right? Now, a few years back, we doubled the homestead exemption from 25 to 50, but it doesn't occur on the first 50,000. Basically, the first 25,000 is on the first 25,000 of your property value, but then the next $25,000 you have to pay taxes. So on the amount, if your property is worth like 25 to only 50,000, you'd only get a $25,000 break. But if your property is worth $75,000, you get a $50,000 break, right? So if your property was worth 75, the property appraiser would say, okay, for tax purposes, when we compute your property taxes, you only have to pay on 25 because your house value is 75. You have $50,000 worth of exemptions. So therefore you only pay on $25,000 worth of property value. Okay, with that sort of as the background, what this is going to do over time, if it passes, is it's going to index that both those two $25,000, they're going to be indexed to inflation. So for just as an example, if inflation was 10% next year and this passed, instead of a $25,000 exemption, you'd get, let's see, my math, 25,000 plus 2,500, you'd get a $27,500 exemption, right? It would go up by inflation every year. And so that's what this would do. It just would basically increase your homestead exemption every year by the rate of inflation, so that over time it would grow. It starts right now, it's 25,000 on the first 25,000, and then 25,000 on the amount between 50 and 75. It will be more than that over the years, and thus would be a tax cut. Again, as I've read about this, I think the progressive position would be to vote against it. That may, like I personally would benefit from it, as many of you probably would as well. If you own your own home, you would pay slightly less in property taxes over time. But why do I say I think the progressive position we do vote no against it? Well, for two reasons. One, the money's got to come from somewhere, and if it the homeowners who have property exemptions aren't paying that money, then it's probably eventually going to be cost shifted over to the renters because they don't have homestead exemptions, and they will thus have to pay presumably maybe a little more because local government is still going to need the money, right? I mean, this is money that funds local government, counties and cities. I will say that this doesn't apply to school districts. That's in there. So they did say, okay, well, we want to make sure we don't take any money away from school district, but it would take money away from your local city and county budgets. And so bottom line, you know, obviously everybody's got to make up their own mind about what they think is, if this is a good idea or a bad idea, if it benefits you or not, if it's better for society or not, et cetera. In my view, the progressive position would be to vote no on this. Florida's already in the bottom 10 in taxes. We have one of the lowest tax burdens in the country. And this, in some ways, I think would, again, push some of that burden onto renters who tend to be lower income compared to homeowners. So in my mind, probably the progressive position is to vote no. And then last but not least, I mentioned the school board, the partisan school board amendment was like a deja vu experience for me. Well, so is this one, repeal of public campaign financing. Because again, I think this was also 1998. I'll have to go back and double check, but I think it was 1998 Constitutional Revision Commission. They put this on the ballot. Do you want to have a system of public campaign financing? And so Florida has that, as does a number of other states. I know I did pull up a map on this. Let's see if I can find that real quick. There we go. So yeah, there are some states, not a lot, but there are some states, including Florida currently, that have some sort of public financing for elections, either a matching funds program like we have in Florida, or some they call a clean elections program. But the thought behind this, well, and actually I'll show you just real quick one other slide. So Florida's got a matching funds program. The way this works is if you're running for a statewide office in Florida currently, so governor, CFO, attorney general, commissioner of agriculture are all statewide state offices. So it doesn't apply to US senator. It doesn't apply to a federal office. If you're running for a statewide office for a state position, if you promise that your campaign will limit the amount that it raises to a certain amount, it's a pretty big amount, like 25 million or so, I can't remember. And then you then will and you raise enough from smaller donations from individual people, then you're eligible for matching funds. And the idea behind public campaign financing is that, and this is it's certainly a progressive idea, is that we want our elected officials not to be so beholden to the big moneyed interest. And instead, we use public money to help fund their campaigns so that they don't have to go out and raise all this money. Now, I will say in theory, that makes a lot of sense. In practice, because of the way they've created the campaign finance system, it doesn't really work in Florida because they limit their campaign spending to a certain amount or campaign raising to certain amounts, but they all create separate political action committees that can take in unlimited contributions. The donations to the campaigns, statewide campaigns, are limited to $3,000. So even if you're fabulously wealthy, the most you could give to the governor's campaign is $3,000. But if you're fabulously wealthy, you could give $1 million to their political action committee that's controlled by the governor or whoever. Anyway, that's a little aside. If you look, this past election cycle 2022, we distributed about $12 million to the governor's races, $400,000 to the CFO races, almost $500,000 to the attorney general races, and we didn't distribute anything to the commissioner of agriculture races. And you can see, for instance, for the governor, you know, the amount of money that different candidates were getting at different periods in time, chief financial officer, et cetera. All right. So bottom line is, to me, you know, historically, and if you look at the theory and who's pushed public campaign financing in the past, it's been progressives. You know, I think the idea is progressive behind it. And to me, again, theoretically, it makes sense. Less dependency on the big money donors if they have, you know, public campaign financing to spread their message. I will say that this has been on the ballot before to repeal, because after it was passed, I'm saying it's about maybe 6, 8, 10 years ago, it was on the ballot to repeal. It did get over 50%, but it didn't get to 60. So it's still in the Florida Constitution. So I don't know whether we'll get to 60 this time or not either. We'll have to see. I will say again that the Republican legislature that that pushed this primarily, and the governor and previous folks as well, when they've talked about it, they will talk about it as like welfare for politicians, right? Taking your government tax dollars and then using it to run nasty negative personal attacks. And there is some truth to the welfare and politicians. That's just hyperbole, trying to steer people against it. But it does actually send tax dollars to the campaigns, and then they can use it to spend negative personal messages if that's what they want to spend it on. That is true. But that's how they tried to go at it last time to get rid of it. But anyway, but I'll stop there. In conclusion, I was talking with my wife about this presentation a couple hours ago, and I laughingly said, instead of taking, let's see, I've talked for like 40 minutes or so, and so I said, instead of taking 40 minutes, I could probably just tell them, in about 30 seconds, which would be this: the two that were put on the ballot by initiative petition, you probably, if you're a progressive, you want to vote yes, because those were put on by progressive groups that were trying to follow progressive values. And the 4 that were put on by the conservative Republican Florida legislature primarily, you probably want to vote no if you're a progressive, because they were put on by conservative Republicans who had, probably a different set of values than most of the progressive alliance here. So maybe I could have just said that at the beginning and saved everybody 30 minutes, but there you go.
By the way, Dr. Jewett, this is Phil once again. We did get a message from Representative Eskamani that said that she's running late. So we are still waiting for her to log on. So if you would like to continue, I see that you actually have another page that you go to that has conclusions, or if you have any other points that you might like to make.
I do. Although this is from a PowerPoint I did that I have created that's all about the entire 2024 election. So it does have a lot more on it than just these constitutional amendments. So,
well, you know what? You have the floor. Why don't you keep
so
running with it?
If you want to see some of that, I'm happy to show it to you and talk about. It's an interesting election season, I think. So happy to chat about that if you would like.
Well, this is an extraordinary election season, and frankly, these 6 items that are going to may modify our state constitution are only part of it. One of the things that you've hit upon and that I think is so important and that's the flow of money. Money in politics is like mother's milk, as they say, or you could say it's like poison. The idea that when Citizens United, the Supreme Court essentially said that corporations can be considered to be like people. They have a right to influence policy or politics directly, and that money can flow, and dark money can flow without oversight. I'm not sure that without complete oversight, but basically with very little oversight. It really threatened our democracy, and I'm really curious to know how you see that. And I don't know if you would like to discuss that issue right now. This is probably a wonderful opportunity until Anna joins us.
Sure, I can talk about that a little bit, and because I did mention it somewhat when I was just talking about public campaign financing. And here's the thing, the U.S. Constitution allows freedom of speech and also allows you to petition the government for redress of grievances. And so if you look at the totality of U.S. Supreme Court decisions that have to do with campaign finance, they do allow some restrictions on giving money, but not a lot. And the reason is because they often come back to, hey, this is political speech. Money is a form of political speech. That's basically what the courts have held. If you go back to the early 1970s, that's when we first had the Federal Election Campaign Act, or at least sort of the modern version of it, was passed. And it said that for the first time, there could be restrictions put on how much money you could donate directly to the candidates in their campaigns. And the rationale and how they were able to get the U.S. Supreme Court to agree to that, because there was a lawsuit filed over that U.S. Federal Election Campaign Act, was that the government had a compelling reason, and that was so that people didn't think their politicians were for sale, right? Because there was all sorts of anecdotal evidence that in the old days, like previous to the early 1970s, lobbyists would come in with suitcases and paper bags full of cash and give it and distribute it to people who were running for office. And it was like a free for all, Wild West kind of a situation where there was very few regulations. If you've ever seen the old classic black and white movie, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, with Jimmy Stewart back from 1939, that was sort of what it was a little over the top because it was Hollywood and all that, but it wasn't that far off the mark that these people were just like coming in and buying things and just giving money directly. So bottom line is the U.S.
Doc, I was just going to say, as my understanding is that the term lobbyists originated during the Lincoln administration. People trying to influence.
Yeah, they would be in the lobby of the U.S. House or Senate. Yeah,
right, and they would be trying to influence him, which of course they were successful at doing, and as they were probably with his predecessors, and certainly have been with his successors.
Absolutely. And I saw Anna was just entering. If I'll just finish one thought, because I talked about the U.S. at the Florida level, basically what we have, and my Politics in Florida book, when I talk about campaign financing, is I point out that we do have restrictions in Florida on state elections, how much you can give to campaigns. I mentioned before, you can give $3,000 to a statewide campaign per election cycle. So for instance, you could give $3,000 to Governor DeSantis' primary campaign, and then you could give $3,000 more to his general election campaign. And for non-statewide offices like state legislature, state house or Senate, it's $1,000 maximum. But that's just directly to the campaign. And as I mentioned earlier, what most politicians do today is they also open up a political action committee. And unlike the campaign accounts, those political action committees are not do not have restrictions on how much you can give. You can you can give unlimited amounts. So wealthy people can give 50,000, 100,000, even $1 million to some of these political action committees. And theoretically, on paper, the political action committee, even though it's affiliated with, say, Governor DeSantis, it's not supposed to coordinate with Governor DeSantis. But everybody knows that there's sort of a nudge and a nod and a wink, and that they sort of do work together. Not just Governor DeSantis, I'm not just picking on him, but basically all these political action committees that are affiliated with elected officials and candidates. So bottom line is we do have at the state level some restrictions on what you can give to campaigns, but because you can give unlimited amounts to the political parties, and because you can give unlimited amounts to the PACs affiliated with the candidates, it's really not a very effective way to control money. So anyway, that we just got off topic there, but let me stop there because we will turn it back over to Anna. Well, I'll turn it back over to Phil, who probably is going to turn it over to Anna.
You know what, Doc? One last little quick question, and that would be, you know these things, so I would certainly. What would be you were talking about the dollar limit campaign that one might donate to the governor. If one were to donate to Representative Eskamani's campaign, what would be the limits in that case?
It's $1,000 per election cycle. So you could give 1,000 to the primary campaign, and then you could give 1,000 more to the general election campaign. But yeah, any if it's a statewide office, so like governor, Florida Supreme Court justice, cabinet official, those are 3,000. All the rest of the races in Florida, local races included, it's $1,000 max.
Again, I want to say thank you, Dr. Jewett. Thank you very much for a very, very insightful and in-depth look at these 6 items specifically that that are vying for people's votes to become amendments to the Florida state constitution. And once we're done with our panel, then we will open the floor for all of our guests, all of our members who are here on the Zoom to ask questions of our panelists. Our next panelist, as we've been anxiously waiting, looking forward to having her, Dr. Anna Eskamani. She is a representative, Florida State House District 42, a longtime friend of the Space Coast Progressive Alliance. And again, many of our members and those of you that have joined us. Again, I just wanted to remind everybody that she has earned her PhD in public administration. So now we are privileged to be able to call her Dr. Eskamani. She was initially elected in 2018 by flipping her legislative seat, and she's been reelected in both 2020 and 2022 in landslide elections. A very popular person, and technically we are supposed to be nonpartisan. Boy, I'll tell you what, I think we are all very, very happy to welcome Dr. Anna Eskamani back to our panel. Dr. Eskamani, are you with us?
I am. Hi, Phil. It's great to see you. And Dr. Jewett, I don't know if this was mentioned, but Dr. Jewett is one of my professors when I was an undergrad student, and he served as my outside committee member on my dissertation. So you can also thank Dr. Jewett for approving my dissertation.
Well, I'm sure that you deserve it. You worked very, very, very hard to earn that distinction, and we are extremely proud of you. We really are. It's a real pleasure to welcome you to the table as Dr. Eskamani.
Thanks for having me.
It is great to have you. We really are interested in your personal experience, your perspective on these 6 potential constitutional amendments. You've seen behind the scenes, you've seen what's going on and why we have these and what your view on them is. Ma'am, you have the floor.
Well, thank you so much again for having me. And I apologize for my scenery. I'm actually walking back to my car after attending the African American Chamber of Commerce hobnob here in Central Florida. So that is why it was delayed. So I do apologize, but it was a good reason. So as Dr. Jewett probably spoke to, there are several different ballot initiatives before us. Some are placed by the legislature and others are placed by the voters. And so with that said, when we're looking at the initiatives placed by the legislature, I think it's always important to have a little bit of suspicion. And I say that as a member of the legislature, because oftentimes the reasoning is not, based on merit of the issue, but there's some sort of political agenda associated with it. I will say for the ballot initiatives that are connected to your property taxes, I think when voters first look at these initiatives, they feel a sense of positivity because they're designed to potentially alleviate some of your property taxes. And obviously, because property values have been so high recently, so have taxes for homeowners. And if you're not a homeowner, sometimes those taxes are often passed down to renters as well. But the reality is when you, for example, the inflation adjustment ballot initiative question for the voters, I believe it's question 5 or 6 for the last 2. It sounds good in the sense that it's supposed to adjust your property insurance rate, on inflation. But the reality is that you as a consumer will probably only save maybe $10 annually, if even that. But the hit to local governments is huge. And we have to remind ourselves that local governments are primarily funded by property taxes. And that goes to your police, your fire. Part of it can also go to schools, but the legislature usually carves out the educational funding piece from property taxation. But if you are frustrated by, for example, the lack of response from public safety officials, which I will say in Orange County, we've actually seen a delay in 911 operators responding to emergency calls because of staff shortages. The reality is that you need a source of revenue. And at the end of the day, local governments, their primary source of revenue will be property taxes. They also have things like local business tax receipts and so forth. But when you pay sales tax, that goes to state coffers. If you buy gas, that also goes to a state trust fund. Now, of course, there's the tourism development tax, the TDT. that stays locally, but that also has a lot of restrictions on it at this time. It can only be spent on tourism promotion. So you really have to think about not just your own individual benefit, but how does this impact the collective good? And I would argue that attempts to restrict what local governments are collecting from property taxes, it's a very small benefit for the consumer, but it's a huge loss to local governments. And what ends up happening is they have to pay for these bills somehow. So we really look at this issue as a tax shift. So it's not that you're going to pay less taxes, someone else is going to pay more, or you're going to see a reduction in your services. Either one, it's a loss. And so because in Florida, we already have so many different mechanisms that cap property taxes, including Save Our Homes, the reality is that people who are of means, the wealthiest among us, already have a lot of benefits to not being taxed more. Meanwhile, the rest of us already carry the burden of paying for these essential services that everyone uses. So I do express caution when it comes to any type of ballot initiative that says it's going to reduce your property taxes, because again, the benefit will be very small for you, but it'll be huge for all the neighbors and local government. With that said, you also have the right to fish and hunt, which unfortunately, when the legislature was hearing this issue, there really weren't many concerns that were expressed. But since then, environmental advocates have hit the ground running, expressing concern for this initiative. So there is a lot of very valid feedback regarding weakening FWC's authority over issues regarding wildlife. And we recently saw this actually come to fruition with House Bill 87, which was the taking of bears. And as folks probably know, this was legislation that basically, I mean, this is not even my language, but it was defined as stand your ground for black bears. And stand your ground doesn't work for humans, and it absolutely should not work for other critters on this planet. And so it basically gives permission for people that if they feel threatened, they can shoot a black bear. And there was already a situation of a black bear found dead in Apopka with a bullet wound. And so FWC is supposed to be, based on the state constitution, the regulator of all types of decisions around hunting and wildlife management. So there is concern that this further erodes FWC's authority over that, and of course could pave the way for other types of just unregulated hunting in Florida, which has safety concerns and also just environmental concerns as well. Then I do want to highlight, of course, the two ballot initiatives driven by citizens, because I do know there's also, funding for the funding match for statewide candidates, which another controversial issue, which again looks good on paper. You ask an average voter, do you think that your public dollars should fund elections? And they probably say no. But the reality is that that public match is actually designed to incentivize smaller donations compared to larger donations, like Dr. Drew was talking about. So it really is trying to even the playing field for a more grassroots candidate that is maybe running against an incumbent or running against someone who has a lot of corporate backing. So that's why public financing of campaigns exists in this country. And I do think eliminating it is actually going to create an uneven playing field for local, smaller donor type of races that may be more representative of people versus large corporations or primarily wealthy individuals. But with that said, I don't want to digress too far from Amendments 3 and 4. So Amendment 3, as everyone knows, is recreational cannabis. Now, this is being backed by the cannabis industry. And I think that's a very important point to stress, because there actually is a lot of contention within the ecosystem of hemp producers and sellers, cannabis producers and sellers, mainly because Florida has what's called vertical integration within the cannabis industry, which means that only a select few can even cultivate and sell and ultimately profit off this market. And it also doesn't allow for cannabis to be grown at home. So you still would have to, buy it from some sort of distributor. There's been very valid criticism that the structure we have in Florida is a monopoly, and again, just benefits a few versus opening up the opportunity of business to minority-owned businesses, to smaller businesses, right? There are so many, for example, successful hemp business owners that are not going to be able to enter this marketplace, right? In an equitable way. Now, with all that known and said, I do think it's still an important initiative to vote yes on, primarily because not only will it be another tax revenue for the state, which we really need, but it also would help to eliminate the carceral patterns associated with cannabis usage. You know, we have in our prisons right now Floridians who are serving time for possession of cannabis. And though the amendment doesn't implement expungement or any immediate release, it does create a platform for that advocacy to happen. And it creates space for legislation to also be crafted, for additional licenses to be made. So the conversations that I've been having with especially our hemp business owners is, the conversation I've been having with our hemp business owners have been centered around what can we do in the legislature to advocate for more accessibility so that you can have the opportunity to get a license to produce and sell recreational cannabis. So though it's an imperfect initiative and is absolutely being pushed by individuals who would benefit from the status quo, I do think that the opportunities for additional tax revenue alongside helping to reduce the carceral nature, the incarceration rates around this issue, for me, lead to a yes vote. With that said, I'm saving the best for last, which is Amendment 4. And I say that because I actually have been really honored to help with Amendment 4. Many folks know that before I ran for office and after I was a student at UCF, when I completed my undergrad degree back in 2012, I was offered a job at my local Planned Parenthood affiliate, and I worked at Planned Parenthood for about 7 years before I made the decision to run for office. And for those who don't know, Planned Parenthood is the nation's leading provider of reproductive health, education, advocacy. My work at Planned Parenthood started, as I mentioned before, as a patient. And so I went to Planned Parenthood for access to contraception when I was 18 years old. And I remember when I walked out of that health center holding this little pill pack in my hand, I felt this deep sense of gratitude that I could make decisions over my body, that I could have that kind of control and self-determination for my future. But with that gratitude also came a feeling of the gravity of the moment, because I realized how fragile that moment was for me and how so many other young people don't have that type of opportunity to make a decision about their body and their well-being. So I committed my college years to really understanding at a deeper level issues that impact women and girls. And so I was a dual degree student in political science, international relations, while also picking up a second major in women gender studies, which at UCF is a interdisciplinary degree. So it really gave me a really great viewpoint of how society defines gender issues and the double standards that women face. And it gave me that front row experience, not only as someone who's directly impacted, but also as an academic to understand these issues from a different lens. And so when I graduated from UCF, I was offered a job at Planned Parenthood. I started as a very entry-level position as the development coordinator, and then became the senior director of public affairs and advocacy. And it's really, it's hard for me to process this, but in the last decade or so, as I've been engaged in this work at a deeper level, we have all witnessed the end of Roe and the rise of all of these abortion bans across the country, which have created a landscape that isn't ending abortion, it's just shifting how women are able to access the care that they need. And so even in Florida, there was a recent report that the rate of abortion services has declined, but nationally it has stayed the same, because what ends up happening is that these patients are having to travel hundreds of miles to access care, assuming they're even able to do that. Many will end their pregnancies at home, which today's modern age and technology is actually very safe, but you can still be criminalized for doing so. Florida not only criminalizes doctors that provide care, but also if you add on the aid and abet statute, it criminalizes anyone who's an accessory to helping someone have an abortion. So the stakes could not be higher when it comes to reproductive freedom in our state. And part of that is also because we're surrounded by other states that have banned abortion at varying degrees, and they don't have a mechanism for a ballot initiative like we do. And so for the Southeast, Florida, for decades, due to our strong right to privacy in our state constitution, has been that source of freedom, the ability to make a decision about your future with your loved ones, not with politicians. And that was taken away from us, not just by Governor DeSantis, but of course by our very conservative state Supreme Court that ruled that right to privacy no longer applies to abortion. And of course, in that same day, allowed this ballot initiative to move forward at a narrow vote of 4-5. So Amendment 4 is special to me, not only just because of my past work and my personal impact in the sense of it directly impacts my life, but it's also just an incredible initiative led by people. In fact, when Amendment 4 was launched, many of you helped to collect signatures to get this thing on the ballot. It was a heavily volunteer-driven initiative, and 99% of our donors were all from Florida. So it was very much a Florida-driven initiative. And of course, now we're looking for support from national partners and so forth, but this has always been a Florida initiative. And to your point, Phil, about being nonpartisan, this initiative is nonpartisan. In fact, about 35% of Floridians who signed a signature, who put their signature to this ballot initiative, were registered Republicans. And that gives me so much hope that we can hit that 60% threshold. But of course, it does require everyone talking to their loved ones, everyone having these conversations, regardless of someone's party affiliation. I mentioned I just left this hobnob hosted by the African American Chamber here in Central Florida, and many Republicans that were there are voting yes on 4. And so it does give me a lot of hope that we can put party dynamics aside and do what's right for the next generation of women and girls, because that's who's most impacted by this. At the end of the day, I want to make sure the next generation has more rights than I ever imagined, and especially more rights than my mom and my grandmother ever imagined. And part of that work starts right here in the Sunshine State. So I'll step back and look forward to questions. And thanks again for your patience with me as I got out of my event and could join you on at this awesome event.
And Representative Eskamani, again, it is an honor to have you here. By the way, I think it's important to remind everyone that you are running for re-election, and that means that you have a website. And what is your website?
Yes, I do. Yes. I mean, it would be weird if I didn't have an opponent, right? Like every cycle I do. So it would be weird if I didn't. But if you want to learn more about how to get involved with Team Anna, we're at annaforflorida.com. And you can learn all about ways to get plugged in. We have a Take Action tab as well. And we're doing the work. We actually, just for y'all's awareness, we're actually doing phone banking in Brevard County as well. So about 3 years ago, I launched a voter registration organization called People Power for Florida. I do not take a salary from it. It's really a love project of mine, but I do have a team that I raise money for, and they're full-time staff. And they're actually on our college campuses. We've been doing voter registration at a grassroots level for years now. We'll be at UCF every single week doing voter registration, and we're at Brevard community events. And we've been doing phone banking in Brevard County specifically for vote by mail renewal. And we're talking about Amendment 4 as our entryway, if you will, when we talk to a voter, because most voters are very interested in that issue. And then we're able to ask, hey, are you ready to vote? Have you requested your vote by mail ballot? Because as y'all know, Governor Ron DeSantis and the Republican legislature canceled everyone's vote by mail ballots. You now have to renew them for every election. And a lot of voters are going to be sitting at home waiting for a ballot to come in. It's never going to come. So if you do want to help just boost that voter interest and engagement, we do phone banking every Monday at 5, and it's virtual. You can join us from everywhere. And if folks are actually interested in a paid opportunity, we are wrapping up the job description right now for a part-time paid phone banking in Brevard County, because we want to finish our Brevard County list before August is over. And I think it's going to be $17 an hour, but don't quote me on that. But we are paying folks to help us finish this list. And so you can send me a note if you're interested in that, but my team's working on the job description to get it out there. It's a short-time gig. Obviously, we just want to get through this phone bank list, but we know phone banking is not easy work. So some people are willing to do more of it if they get a little bit of a financial incentive. So we're happy to make that happen.
And we have your site posted in the chat for those that are here with us on Zoom. You can go to the chat, and it is Anna for FOR Florida spelled out.com. So anybody that is interested, again, we had a couple of other candidates that have their sites posted in our chat as well. We welcome candidates to our events, and we always doesn't matter what party, what your background is. We always like to give them a moment to speak out, talk about their issues, and talk about what their campaign is about. Again, it is just such a great honor to have both you and Dr. Jewett here with us tonight. I would like to, for those that may have just joined us or joined us recently, you're with the Space Coast Progressive Alliance. This is our first Thursday event for July, and it's called Vote Smart 2024 Florida Ballot Measures Explained. We have two fantastic experts on the field on our panel. And now we're going to open the floor for you, our guests, to ask questions of them. I ask that you please try to limit your question to 2 minutes. We ask that you make questions, not statements. So this is a chance to get information, and all of us can share it. By the way, we also ask our panelists to please have one or two or maybe more action items that you would like our members, our guests to take, because we can sit around here all day long learning about issues, but until we take action, we're only educating ourselves. It's important for all of us to take what we learn at our events and spread the knowledge to our friends and family, and encourage them to take action too. So if you are interested in asking a question, doesn't matter what kind of device you're on, a phone, a tablet, a laptop, look for the little reactions button, click on that. You'll see a little thing that says raise hand. When you click on that, then you will jump to the front of the list, and I'll be able to call on you and give you the floor to ask questions of our wonderful panelists, Dr. Anna Eskamani, Dr. Aubrey Jewett, two doctors in the house. It's great to have them. It really is so cool. And our first question is from Joanne Terry. Joanne, you have the floor. But you have to unmute yourself. There you go.
Okay, can you hear me?
We've
I guess
got you.
I can't unvideo myself. So okay. So the bills that the Florida legislature sponsored, were they all approved by a certain a HB or SB motion and vote? And if so, do you know what the number is?
Yeah, that's a great question, Joanne. They're actually what are called House Joint Resolutions or Senate Joint Resolution. So a ballot initiative is not going to be a typical HB or SB, which for those who don't know stand for House Bill or Senate Bill. It has to be an HJR. I definitely can find the numbers for you. I don't have the top of my head, but I can probably dig it up while we're here. But if you search under HJR, you'll be able to find the ones that pass. But every year, lawmakers file several HJRs, right? They just don't always get any momentum. And with that said, there were some efforts to do at the committee level. I know there was some discussion around doing amendments, because you can do amendments on HJRs too to change the language or change its purpose or change its title. Now, one other distinction between HJRs and regular bills is the required vote for passage. So to pass a House Joint Resolution, it requires 2/3 from both chambers. And this is why we were actually able to stop previous HJRs from going to the ballot, because it required 2/3 and Republicans didn't have 2/3, and they required some Democratic support. One of the more controversial HJRs from previous years would never pass, and that includes efforts to increase the threshold to pass ballot initiatives from 60% to 66%, which the legislature has tried to do now multiple years in a row, but they haven't been able to get enough votes to do it. This year, of course, it just didn't matter. Even if Democrats all voted no, they had the vote. So it was a year where they pushed through a lot of different HJRs. And I will tell you, none of these typically happen on a red versus blue vote. You know what I mean? Like, it just kind of depends on the issue, because a lot of the issues are just kind of nuanced. And even when it came to Article 5 convention, which is kind of a separate subject, but if those who don't know, an Article 5 is a is part of the U.S. Constitution. It's about 100 words long. It describes the process to facilitate a convention of states to amend the U.S. Constitution, and it's kind of scary because it's never been done before. But if I think it's 3/5 of states like sign on to a Article 5 convention, there actually could be one. And this was an issue that was very challenging for Democrats because they picked topics that sounded very pleasing to people, including term limits for Congress and that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, we were able to actually get Democrats to hold the line on those issues because an Article 5 convention itself is such a unprecedented idea and a clear agenda of extremists that we were able to hold the line. But on a lot of these ballot initiatives, it just varies on the subject because even on the property tax ones, it's hard because you don't want to be accused of, not wanting to reduce taxes, right? Because that can be such a delicate issue to talk about if voters don't always understand the nuances involved in it. But you can see all those vote counts and everything by searching the HJRs, and I can try to dig those up for you as well.
Well, I mean, that's fine. I'm sure I could probably do a Google search. I just thought you might know them off the top of your head. So yeah, I'm sure I can find it. So thank you.
That sounds great.
Actually, Dr. Jewett, I think, is about to weigh in.
There you go. Here, let me just go like this.
Oh, wonderful.
There you go. Sorry, I gotta.
It's always good to have a professor in the house.
There you go. So if you can see my screen, hopefully there, you can see the 4 that were proposed by the legislature and the joint resolution number. So
that's perfect.
The partisan school districts is HJR 31, right to hunt and fish, HJR 1157. The homestead exemption, giving it tying it to inflation is HJR 7017. And then the repeal of campaign financing was a Senate joint resolution, SJR 1114.
That's perfect, Dr.
Dr. Jewett, did you want to add anything to what Representative Eskamani said?
No, I think she did a great job. I just knew I could find this on this is, if you ever want to look, it's on the Florida Division of Election website. Go to their initiative amendment revisions database. And it starts off with like default, it has all of them listed. So I just went to active and then clicked the one that made ballot. So that's the 6 that are actually going to be on the ballot this time. And that's how you get there. So.
Here's a quick one, if I might just throw this out for both of you, and that is when you are talking to constituents and you want to look something up, I like to go to the Ballotpedia. Seems like a good source for information like this, not necessarily getting it in the nitty gritty on how things were created, but what's the background? What's the wording? What are the pros and cons? Seems like Ballotpedia is a pretty good source. Do you both of you, do you have any recommendations to us where to go for doing our homework?
Yeah, I mean, Ballotpedia is pretty reasonable. I don't have quite the draconian don't use this with my students like I do with Wikipedia. Wikipedia is basically anybody can edit it. With Ballotpedia, they actually do have some trained editors, so it tends to, in my view, tends to be a little bit more accurate. But in terms of some of these amendments, the Statewide League of Women Voters almost always has a nice summary of these issues and also puts forth that they took a position on it. That would be one that I would suggest.
Yeah, I definitely want to echo League of Voters of Florida has a fantastic voter guide that also it's very objective because at the end of the day, a lot of folks want to know, what does it mean if I vote yes? What does it mean if I vote no? Right? Like they just want that kind of black and white explanation. And the League of Voters often does a great job in providing that. Your local editorial board with your newspaper will typically do the research and lifting as well. If we're ever talking about specific topics that people have an interest in, that there may be an associated organization. So obviously when it comes to the ballot initiative, Planned Parenthood, other orgs are going to have perspectives up for Yes on 4. So sometimes you can also find organizations that are aligned on the issue, like environmental groups that are concerned with Amendment 2, So I think it's also helpful to look at, organizations that reflect your values and see if they have positions on it. And the only other advice I'd offer is if we're talking about candidates and their incumbents, it's really great to look at their vote record, look at myfloridahouse.gov, see what bills they filed and sponsored. That can tell you a pretty good story about this person's interest and their priorities as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Excellent tips for all of us. Our next speaker, our next question would be from Jan Moran, our Action Projects Committee Chair, and full disclosure, my sister. So Jan, you've got the floor.
Okay, my question is for both of you. And I realize it's a total toss-up as to what the answer is going to be, but what do you think the odds are of each of these 6 amendments passing? In other words, you think number 1's going to pass, number 2's going to pass, number 3's going to pass? Just give us a kind of general idea of what you think realistically we can expect from the election.
I can go first after doing. Yeah, so I will be very candid. I think that there is a history of the legislatively placed ballot issues not passing. And a part of that is because of the 60% requirement. So they might get 55, 56, 57. But getting 60%, unless there's a paid campaign operation behind it, it's just very hard to get to 60%. And the reason why is Florida is just a huge state, right? 22 million people, multiple expensive media markets. Like, unless you have a paid operation that's knocking on doors, that's doing commercials, that's penning op-eds, right? Unless you have a more aggressive on the ground operation with yard signs and whatnot, it's just people just are not going to be aware that it is even on their ballot. And some folks, they read it and they ignore it because they don't understand it, right? And because some of this it's not written in language that is easily understood for an everyday voter. And I know for me, it's like, if you're intimidated, you might not participate, right? And so when it comes to Amendment 3 and 4, I feel very confident about. And obviously I'm, have a personal bias on these, but I do think that on Amendment 3, it's very well funded, and it is funded again by the corporations that benefit from it. But nonetheless, they are using their resources to do advertising. It will be everywhere. You'll see it on digital. You'll see it on. There's already TV commercials. I mean, it's going to be a very well funded campaign for Yes on 3. And then for Yes on 4, that's also the goal. Now, obviously, we don't have the same mechanism, if you will, of corporations funding Yes on 4, but we are raising funds and have a lot of generous supporters. And with that said, what's interesting about Amendment 4 compared to Amendment 3 is that there is an attempt for an opposition campaign. So there are organizations that are against Amendment 3. So that includes the Florida Retail Federation and the Florida Chamber and the Republican Party of Florida are the 3 main orgs that I've seen who are against Amendment 3. It's yet to be seen if they're going to raise resources to campaign against it, but they've made public statements in opposition. For Yes on 4, there's about 6 organizations that have started that are anti-abortion, and they're mostly funded right now by the Catholic bishops. But the Heritage Foundation is in opposition, the Liberty Council. So some of these national organizations are also organizing against Amendment 4. So we can expect to see an anti-campaign alongside the proactive campaign. And again, that's going to impact how voters vote on this. Again, I feel very confident how voters vote on this for its success, but at the end of the day, it's also going to just depend on how much elbow grease we put into it, right? But based on the fact that all other states have had ballot issues for abortion, we have one, gives me a lot of hope and confidence. But again, our threshold is very high. Even Ohio, they pass at 57%. So 60 is not easy, but it definitely can be done.
Just as a quick reminder, 3 is marijuana, 4 is abortion. And Dr. Jewett, do you want to address that as well?
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit to what Anna said. I am cautiously optimistic that 3 and 4 will get to 60%. I will say the one real wild card to me is the dramatic change in voter registration in this state over the last 3 years. So we're in a different political environment than we've ever been since I've been tracking Florida politics for 30 years, which is that Democrats typically had not a huge lead, but at least a small lead in voter registration. And that's just not the case. When I just looked this up the other day, Republicans now have a 900,000 plus voter registration lead over Democrats in the state. So that's I say I'm cautiously optimistic, but the thing that worries me is that even though there is definitely some bipartisanship on the recreational marijuana and even on the abortion rights amendment, as Anna said, and I mentioned earlier as well, that's the thing that makes me a little bit worried. On the four that the legislature proposed, I'm fairly confident that partisan election of school district boards will not pass. I could be wrong, but we'll see. And same thing with campaign finance requirements. Since we tried that before and it didn't quite get to 60, I suspect it won't pass again this time, but you never know. The one that I think is most likely to pass, if it passes, that the legislature did, would be number 5 about annual adjustments to value of certain homestead exemptions. Now, it might not pass because when I read it to everybody and sort of laughed because of the legal language, it's pretty hard to figure out what the heck it means on one level. But if it just gets pushed as, hey, this will cut your property taxes, I think that's got, of the 4 the legislature put on, I think that probably has the highest chance of passage. That would be my thought. And then just to echo basically what Anna and Phil also said, and actually maybe this is jumping ahead to the action items. Yeah, if you feel strongly about some of these, as some of us obviously do, then yeah, you need to talk to your friends and neighbors and make sure they understand these initiatives. And I shouldn't say initiatives, these proposed amendments, because only 2 of them are actually initiatives. But make sure people understand these proposed initiatives, particularly the ones that are most important to you. And talk it up or donate some money if you have some money to spare that you could donate to the causes, or donate some of your time. Because even at best, I'm only cautiously optimistic, as I said, that a couple of these that I think are important are going to pass. But I don't want to be too negative. As Anna said, if you work hard, I think it's certainly possible to get to 60% even on those 2.
And Gina, thank you for your patience. One last quick little thing I'd like to throw up real fast for Dr. Jewett, since you mentioned it, and that is the reason that there has been a change in voter registration in the state of Florida in the past few years. If I can just throw this out, and I'd love for you to discuss it, and that is traditionally, we like to have the voters select their representatives, right? Unfortunately, and I'll say it honestly, and that is Republican legislators in the state of Florida have been passing legislation that selects who gets to vote and who doesn't get to vote. So effectively, we've got legislators selecting who the voters will be. And it's that, if maybe that's oversimplifying it. I'd love for you to address that really quickly, since you mentioned it.
Yeah, I think that has definitely contributed to the problem in 2 ways. One, passing laws to make it harder to register, passing laws to kick people off more quickly if they didn't turn out, for instance, in the off-year election. And also just the old-fashioned, when you talk about choosing voters, my mind immediately goes to gerrymandering, because the Florida House and Senate and the congressional delegation, if you go to was it the Princeton gerrymandering project? I'm having a little mind blank, but I think it was the Princeton gerrymandering project. I mean, they basically gave Florida an F on all 3 of their maps in terms of gerrymandering, despite the fact that technically you're not supposed to be able to do that because of our Florida constitutional amendment. But it seems pretty clear to me that this new Florida court system and Florida Supreme Court is going to allow it. But I wouldn't disagree that is definitely part of the problem. That the legislature's passed laws to make it more difficult to vote and register and vote, actually, because we talked about the difficulty in mail ballots as well, and then the gerrymandering. The other thing I'll throw out there, though, is that Ron DeSantis, I give him, from a neutral perspective, I give him the credit for this in one way. When we were coming out of COVID, he struck a nerve that a lot of conservative Republicans around the country felt, and they wanted to reopen from COVID, and they didn't believe in masks, and they didn't believe in vaccines and these kinds of things. And so when he reopened the state and did this, Florida was #1 in population growth in 2021, and then it was #2 in 2022. Or I might have the years mixed, it might be 22, 23, but in any event, our population growth has really been one of the highest. And some research done by Susan McManus and some other folks, she's a former colleague of mine, show that a lot of those new residents disproportionately were registering Republican. So what I give him credit for is getting a lot more people to come to the state that were Republican. Historically, we had a lot of people move into the state, but it was fairly evenly divided. But in the last couple of years, because of COVID and that response, it seems like a lot more people were disproportionately Republican coming to the state. So anyway, that's my thoughts.
Thank you, Doc. Gina Lindhorst, you've been very patient. I see, Jan, you have your hand up, and I'm going to go to Gina Lindhorst first, and then I'll come back to Jan Moran. So, Gina, you have the floor.
Great. Thank you very much. I don't know if you can see my t-shirt. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters of the Space Coast, and we are a nonpartisan group, a grassroots organization that have as a mission empowering voters by educating them and helping them to have agency over their votes and getting information to make smart choices. And I just want to say that we have a wonderful program. It's a website that is called Vote 411. And it has currently a review of all the Zoom meeting. It has all of the amendments for our state now listed and described and discussed essentially. And there's history on the vote for Amendment 4. There's a history of what it was and why it's important that people know about it. I encourage everyone to check out Vote 411 and just type in vote411.org if you want. But it's wholly owned by the League of Women Voters, which is nonpartisan. So it doesn't have any bias. It's not supposed to. And it has also candidates who answer questions and put information in their own words in. But since we're talking about the amendments, it has all of those on there now. And what would happen if you vote yes? What would happen if you vote no? It has that currently, and it's very professionally done, and it's a slick program.
And Gina, I'll bet you have a question in there somewhere. You have a question for one of our panelists?
Well, I was wondering if I guess I've lost it all of a sudden, but I appreciate both of you being here so much. It's really a pleasure.
Thank you, Gina.
Thank you.
And I know that Suzanne Taylor, your president, was with us. It looks like she may have just dropped off, but we are next month doing a joint event with the League of Women Voters and with the NAACP Central, and it is called Hobnob with the Candidates. For those that have just joined us, and missed the announcement of that earlier, just a quick reminder of that. That'll be next month. August 1st will be the first Thursday, and it will be live at the Unitarian Universalist Friendship Fellowship Center. That's just north of Pineda Causeway off of US 1. The address is 3115 Friendship Place, Rockledge, Florida. It's a chance to meet and talk with directly live a number of candidates for our local offices here on the Space Coast. Again, we value the alliance with the League of Women Voters and with the NAACP. And this is something we really appreciate very much. So thank you very much, Gina. Thanks to Suzanne, wherever she is. She may have drifted off into cyberspace. And Jan Moran, I know you had your hand up. Did you have another question?
I kind of just wanted to know what they thought about the first amendment, the one on the partisanship of the school boards. I was really curious about that one. I realize it's probably not really relevant to a lot of people, but what do you think the odds are on that one?
Well, great question. And I didn't have a chance to talk about this one as much, so I do appreciate the opportunity to highlight it. I mean, I think it's very problematic. It is trying to politicize what really shouldn't be a partisan political position. And candidly, we all know the motivation behind that, right? Because the reality is that in very conservative parts of Florida, smart, effective, thoughtful individuals have been elected to the school board. I mean, I'm thinking of, Jennifer Jenkins in Brevard County as an example, right? Who are not partisan whatsoever, but the positions have been politicized by opponents. And oftentimes it's organizations like Moms for Liberty that come in and create havoc and chaos, creating controversy when there isn't any. But leading to partisanship and races that are not supposed to be partisan. I think voters are just so frustrated by the partisanship that they wouldn't support such a change. I think it's refreshing to have positions that are not partisan, where you can actually really have substantive policy debates, right? And it does remind me of what is a larger national effort here. And NPR just did a story about this maybe 2 days ago, how in some of the states across America where they have open primaries, meaning that anyone can vote in the primary, it's not just closed to parties, there tends to be a result of a middle voter preference, if you will. So the folks who win those elections are not going to be very far to the left or very far to the right. It's folks who are kind of working towards the middle to make everyone happy, right? And some of those elections take place in very conservative states that we think of being conservative, like Louisiana. And some of the Congress members there voted to impeach Trump, for example. They voted in patterns that were oppositional to the Republican Party. So now those state officials want to make those primaries closed. So when I see the partisan effort on the school board, I think it's no different in some of these other states where they're trying to create closed primary systems, because if they want control over politicians, then having party labels makes it easier. I don't know if that makes sense. But at the end of the day, when you have elected officials that are loyal, I'm using air quotes, right, to an institution, in the case of Republicans, it's not even a party anymore. It's just Trump. It's just being loyal to Trump. If they don't have the party ID, it's harder to maintain that control, that loyalty. So I think a part of it is like, if we make all of our school boards partisan, then they have to stay true to a certain platform, even does not reflect the interest of the constituencies. So I don't think voters are going to give that 60%. The only counter I see is, quote, transparency, right? Because some people are going to say, oh, well, if I know what party they are, that helps me with transparency. But at the end of the day, I don't know if that argument carries as much weight next to all the other points I just made. But I could see that being the counter.
And Dr. Jewett?
Yeah, I'm cautiously optimistic that this one will not pass. Since we put it in 1998 and the voters thought that it was a good idea not to have partisan elections. I think I think we can get more than 40% of the voters that turn out that will think it's not a good idea to inject national and state level partisanship into our school board elections. Again, I could be wrong. My predictions have been famously wrong before, but so take that with a grain. But I think it will not pass. I think. I might add, I hope it doesn't pass as well, personally. But
for people that are paying attention here on the Space Coast, we've seen this strange phenomenon of our sheriff considering himself a constitutional sheriff, or a supreme decider of all things legal, the ultimate authority over right and wrong. And if anybody is paying attention, that's a very dangerous thing. As you mentioned, I believe earlier, that Ron DeSantis injected himself into school board elections across the state, politicizing those elections unnecessarily. This is like, frankly, in my opinion, it's like poison on school boards. School boards are a flashpoint across our country. And if anything, we should be focusing on trying to de-escalate that tension, to give educators the best possible voice for the benefit of their students, and injecting politics into the school boards, which is what this does, just doesn't make sense. Just like having politics in with your sheriff, it does not make sense. Anyway, enough of that. I'm looking for additional questions. I'm surprised I haven't seen more hands up. If you have a question, this is your chance. Gina, you may have thought of your question. I don't know, or not. If you haven't, okay. If anybody has a question, please look for the reaction button, whether you're on your phone, your laptop, your pad. Click that reaction button, and you'll see a little button that says raise hand. And if you would like to ask a question of this spectacular panel, this is your chance. Honestly, the briefings have been so darn good. It's like, gosh, I had a couple of questions in my mind, and they were already answered very effectively by our panelists. And maybe, if we don't have a question, maybe it's time for us to talk a little bit about action items. The obvious action items for everyone, as we've been having in our recent First Thursday events, is to get involved, to be sure that you vote personally, but also to encourage your neighbors, your friends, educate them as you can, to so that they know that their vote by mail ballot may not be coming in the mail, and it's not by accident. It's intentional, that people in our state legislature don't want them to have a vote by mail ballot, for no damn good reason, because frankly, vote by mail is something that in my entire professional life, I wouldn't have been able to vote if I hadn't been able to vote by mail. I was away from home for many elections. So the ability to, our military people have to vote by mail when they're away from home. They've got to vote by mail. So many people, truck drivers, people that fly airplanes, people that travel the world doing various things, they've got to vote by mail, or they don't have a voice. And so when you disenfranchise people by taking away the right to vote by mail, you are disenfranchising a significant portion of the population. And frankly, you then are self-selecting certain people that you wish to vote will have the voice in the election. So action items. Let's talk about action items. We already just got a great one for the League of Women Voters, and that is to go check out vote411.org, a great place to go to get information. We've talked about where you can go for yourself to do your own homework, such as Ballotpedia, such as the state's resource for looking for language on legislation, and to see how various legislators have voted. Let me open the floor to our panelists. What would you like to see as action items? Who would like to go first?
I'll repeat a few things I said a minute ago. I sort of jumped the gun and talked about some of the things, but yeah, if you're particularly on these amendments, try to be, well, look up yourself. So hopefully you've learned a little bit more from listening to Anna and myself, but read up on these a little bit more, and then talk to people. Write letters to the editor, go online, share it on social media. If you feel strongly about any or all of these amendments, you need to let people know what they would do, and how you see this either helping or hurting the future of Florida. And if you have the time and or money, you can donate to either some of these campaigns or some of these individual people running for office in your area that share your values. So, that's sort of, and of course, vote, obviously, get out there and vote, right? Make sure you vote for these, vote on these 6. In my view, like I said, the short version was the four that were put on by the legislature, they're probably not very progressive. The 2 that were put on by initiative by the groups, those are pretty progressive. So, you probably vote yes for those 2, no on the other 4, if you're trying to vote on the progressive position. So that's my simple thoughts.
And Representative Eskamani, what did you say?
Well, thank you so much for having us. It's always an honor to share space with each one of you, but especially Dr. Jewett, one of my longtime mentors. So it's great to be here. And just really want to say, keep going. I mean, we need these types of conversations. We need to reach more people. Like Dr. Jewett said, talk to everyone about these ballot initiatives. You know, a lot of folks don't even finish the ballot. They just pick off the boxes they know and they walk away. And it's so important for us to inform our community, to create a sense of empowerment and investment in our future. And so take this conversation everywhere you go. And of course, I'm happy to come back and do it again, right? I mean, these are going to be on your November ballot. So we definitely have time to spread the word and educate our communities and make sure folks feel ready and informed come November. Of course, the August elections are a priority, and you may have local issues on your ballot. You know, local governments also have charters and ordinances and whatnot, referendum. So do your research locally too. Double check to make sure your county doesn't have a question for you to consider, or your school board. For example, in OCPS for Orange County Public Schools, we have the renewal of a penny sales tax for public education. So that'll be on the upcoming ballot as well. So don't forget those local issues alongside the statewide ones. And then the only other thing I'll add is, you know, check your voter status, share vote by mail renewal options online. You know, Florida does have online voter registrations, not as well utilized or promoted. We do have it. So share it with your contacts. Make sure folks know they can typically update their information or even register online, and they can do the same for vote by mail.
We do have a very good system here in Brevard County, our supervisor of elections. We just had our supervisor of elections on our last event to explain to everybody and to beg them, please check your status. Please look at your vote by mail status. It's easy to, if it's expired, it's easy to renew it. So let me read, I'm going to reread some of these things very quickly. Basically, read about what's going on. Talk to your friends, relatives, people at work about what you know, what you found out. Write a letter to the editor if it's something that you feel fire in your belly about. Donate. Get involved in a campaign like Representative Eskamani's campaign. You know, the reality is that you can do even one day a week, one day a month can make a real difference in a campaign. A couple of dollars. You don't necessarily have to be donating to the limit. You can make a huge difference if you can put a little bit of money into somebody's campaign or one of these issues. Those essentially are like campaigns. Be sure to vote when the chance comes, and let's not forget, everybody, that these upcoming primary elections, we think of them as primary elections, sometimes they are the election for candidates in local races and for local issues. So don't think that the primary election is something for other people to vote in. It's something for all of us to vote in. We always remind people to think globally, but act locally. Again, remember, think globally, act locally. There we go. And we've got vote 411 coming up there from the League of Women Voters, and that is something to remember. Vote down ballot. If you're going there, don't just vote for the president. It is painful to see people that they undervote. You know, they literally are just voting for one or two people. Take the time, vote down the ballot. It's very, very important. And of course, remember to go to the Supervisor of Elections site and check your status. Make sure that your registration is current, and that if you want to vote by mail, that you are in the system. I'm really, really proud to have both of you here tonight. We are so lucky to have you. And remember, everybody that's watching this, that this will be on the Space Coast Progressive Alliance Facebook page for later viewing. If a friend of yours missed it and you want to have them watch it, it's as with most of our meetings, they're up on our Facebook, or not Facebook, on our YouTube channel. Excuse me, it's on our YouTube channel to watch later. And I thank very much Dr. Cardinal for taking care of that. Nellie Cardinal, our tech expert. The program must not end here. Please do something. Don't just sit at home and watch our events and save it for yourself. Our next First Thursday program, in cooperation with the League of Women Voters of the Space Coast and the Central Brevard branch of NAACP, will be Hobnob with the Candidates. We've already talked about it. You can see more information on our website, www.scpaflorida.org. PANELISTS.com. Please do check our website. And I want to thank all of you that attended. Thanks. And I'll tell you what, if you can bring yourselves off of mute. Let's give a round of applause to Dr. Aubrey Jewett, Dr. Anna Eskamani. It's so cool to say that doctor part. I love it. Dr. Anna Eskamani, our representative from Florida House
Wonderful.
District 42.
Thank
Thanks
you.
to all of you. Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Give them a round of applause. You know that if you were in a live meeting right now, we'd all be standing up and
Okay.
giving you a great round of
Well,
applause, a
thank
great
you.
shout out.
I do want to give a special thank you to Vicky, who invited me and reached out to me. Love you, Vicky.
Love
Vicky
you,
Impoko.
Anna. Love you, Anna.
Wonderful to see Vicky Impoko, past president, local hero, again, we have so many wonderful people here tonight. It's wonderful to see all of you. And so again, we have, and I see Jan, you're waving your finger. What is that? Jan, you should be off mute.
Someone named Danny is raising his hand.
Danny, are you?
Someone's
Yeah, I
raising.
just wanted to say something earlier. For some reason, I can't make my video work, but earlier the comment was talking about Citizen United, and I just like to say that when I think of Citizen United, I go, that's when we changed from one man, one vote to $1, one vote.
True.
Yeah, votes could be cheap depending on who you are. So thanks for that thought. I'm sorry that we missed you. I did not see your hand come up, Danny. Anyway, everybody, thank you for being here. Thank you so much for your participation, to our entire team, to our Action Projects Committee for making this possible tonight. We will see you all next month. Again, the Hobnob. Check out our website. We're going to have quite a crowd of candidates, and we very much look forward to seeing you there. Hybrid, so it'll be partially live, partially on Zoom. Look forward to seeing you then. Have a wonderful evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being
Thank you,
here tonight.
everybody. Thank you.
Thanks.
Great program.
Nice talking with you. Bye-bye.
Thank
Good
you.
night, everyone.